Welcome back. So today we will discuss about the mechanism of breathing, and in mechanism of breathing we will try to focus the mechanistic aspect of our breathing, our respiratory system, including what are the strength, what are the composition, what are the muscles involved in doing this activity. This is one, and the next one is what are the volume aspect, what are the volume terminology which we are using in order to depict that kind of volume exchange happening in case of total lung. So, in order to understand this mechanism of breathing, one has to understand that in the next slide, that inspiration is air in and expiration is air out. That means inspiration. So, what we are discussing here is mechanism of breathing. So, mechanism of breathing, that inspiration is air in and expiration is air out. That means these two activities are very essential component of a breathing mechanism. Now, in order to understand this inspiration and expiration mechanism, one has to understand the total lung aspect, that what is happening in this cavity, right. So, if we try to describe the whole structure once again, although we have gone through the structure of this thing, but in this context, when we are talking about the inspiration and expiration in terms of the mechanism aspect, then we need to understand. So, suppose this is in roughly we have these two lungs. So, we have this right lung and the left lung, and these are lined by a very firm cavity. We called it chest cavity in normal, and in biology it is called thoracic cavity. So, thoracic cavity is a cavity, a cage like structure that is kind of encapsulating these two lung lobules. Now, these are lined by what we have discussed earlier in the form of a very compact cage like structure, and this we are calling ribs. So, these are ribs which are nicely covering the capsule. These ribs are merging in between in the middle of the chest cavity. So, these are merging in this area. The whole ribs are merging in this area, and this middle merged area is called sternum. So, sternum is the middle area where the whole ribs are merging. Now, in between these ribs, we have a very specific muscle, although we have discussed it. Now, we need to understand this in context of the breathing mechanism. This muscle is called intercoastal muscle. Intercoastal muscle. In nomenclature, there are some external intercoastal muscle and there are some internal intercoastal muscle. External is outside, internal is inside. So, these muscles are very, very important in order to do breathing. Now, next is this whole chest cavity and this whole area is nicely in the bottom is supported by a nice kind of muscle which we have already discussed called diaphragm. So, this diaphragm is very important in order to provide strength to this chest cavity. Now, below this, so in general we are calling it, this is a thoracic cavity, this is the thorax. So, the cavity inside is called thoracic cavity, and just below this cavity we have abdominal. So, we are calling abdominal cavity. So, there are muscles which are coming from this abdominal side, right. So, these are some of the muscles which are coming from the bottom area, the abdominal side, and these are called abdominal muscle. So, these are abdominal muscles. So, abdominal muscles are the muscles which are coming from the abdominal side, and then we have this diaphragm and we have intercostal muscle. So, there are 3 muscles involved in this whole process: intercostal muscle, diaphragmatic muscle, and the abdominal muscle. Now, what is happening? Just to understand, just try to give a basic understanding what is happening. When the pressure inside, this is called intrathoracic. Anything which is called intra stands for inside. Like we are generally discussing intra-school tournament. So, intra-school tournament means tournament which is organized inside the school between classes, right. So, we are calling it intra. When we are call it inter, that means in between two. So, inter-school tournament, when you have a competition in the schools in between two different schools. So, intra means inside. So, here what we are using a terminology intrapulmonary area or intrapulmonary volume. So, intrapulmonary, pulmonary stands for lung. So, intrapulmonary pressure and intrapulmonary volume, we will use these two terminology in this context. It is very important to understand this concept here. When these things are contracting, the diaphragmatic muscle, and when these intercostal muscles are also contracting, what is happening? This whole chest cavity is expanding. So, this rib and this area is getting expanded. So, because of this expansion, intrathoracic volume is getting increased. In addition to intrathoracic volume increase, there is a decrease in intrathoracic pressure. So, if the pressure is low inside the chest cavity, and since we know that we are getting the air from outside, so the outside pressure is always high, and we have gone through the process that the whole mechanism is happening because of the higher to lower concentration gradient. So, from higher pressure to lower pressure, the things are coming inside lung cavity or thoracic cavity. So, in nutshell, there is a contraction in diaphragmatic muscle and intercostal muscle, and then they are causing expansion. The volume of the intrathoracic cavity or intrapulmonary area is getting increased, the pressure is getting down, and because of this down pressure, the outside pressure of the air, which is quite high in the atmosphere, is getting inside. So, this is inspiration. So, the air is coming into this cavity. Once we are done with the inspiration, and when the things are saturated, what is happening? The whole thoracic cavity is getting relaxed. Relaxed means this diaphragmatic muscle is getting relaxed, this intercostal muscle getting relaxed, and because of this relaxation, the volume, the lung intrapulmonary volume is getting into its normal position, and because of this normal position, the pressure is getting increased. And because of this increased pressure, which is quite high as compared to outside, the air is forced out. So, these two phenomena, the intrathoracic pressure and the volume, is important in order to understand. So, simply if the volume is high, in order to accommodate more and more air, the air will come inside. And then its reverse is also true. When the things are getting done, then these are coming into normal position and the air is coming out, or it is expiring out. So, now these are some of the important aspects of the breathing. Now, on an average, a normal typical human day-to-day activity, there is saying that approximately 12 to 14 or 12 to 16 kind of breathing is possible per minute. So, every minute people are using 12 to 14 breathing cycle in normal condition. Well, this is varying in case of different disease condition. Now, disease condition stands for anything which is causing abnormality in this lung area. That includes asthma, that includes pneumonia and other aspect which we will discuss next lecture. So, in general, these are the real picture or the mechanism of breathing. Now, having said that, we are doing normal breathing, like we are just doing a normal inspiration and expiration. Certain time we do forceful inspiration. Now, forceful inspiration stands for we need some extra pressure in order to inhale some extra air. At that time, this diaphragmatic muscle and intercostal muscle may not sufficient to do that kind of force in the chest cavity. And that time, this abdominal muscle is coming into picture. So, this abdominal muscle is doing some extra force at the time of forceful inspiration, and at the time of relaxation we call it forceful expiration also. So, this abdominal muscle is additional support at the time of some forceful activities. So, forceful activity are over and above the normal activity done by diaphragm and intercostal muscle. So, abdominal muscle is another one. So, in nutshell, abdominal muscle, intercostal muscle and diaphragm are the three basic functional muscle involved in this mechanism. Now, we are having some idea about this mechanism of breathing. Now, we will see that what are the volume aspect, how we are correlating this one in terms of volume in mm of Hg, mercury. So, we will now discuss this all mechanistic approach of breathing with volume aspect. And in order to understand this one, let us draw a graph. So, we will try to understand this one in terms of a graphical one. So, let us draw a graph. So, this is y axis and this is x axis. So, any coordinate we can call it the horizontal axis or the vertical axis, and in mathematics we always call it x axis and y axis. So, we can put here as lung volume, that means this area will define the total volume capacity, and this will be time. So, what we are doing here, we are resolving a graph with time and volume, the total lung volume. So, try to understand here the basic concept. So, what is happening? We are doing normal breathing. So, inspiration, expiration, inspiration, expiration. Now, this is very normal routine breathing phenomena that air is inspiring in and expired out in the normal process. This routine volume of air which we are doing every time in normal breathing is called tidal volume. So, I will give a complete picture, complete full form later on, because that will clutter the whole board. So, just to understand, I am just writing it as tidal volume, TV. So, this tidal volume is approximately 500 ml. Now, this is routine process of breathing. Certain time we also do forceful breathing, forceful inspiration. So, at that time when we do forceful inspiration, the volume is quite high. High means there is an involvement of abdominal muscle. So, abdominal muscle is also doing some extra pressure in order to accommodate more air in the thoracic cavity. So, this extra volume is inspired above the tidal volume. This is called inspiratory reserve volume. So, this is inspiratory reserve volume. I am just giving you here short form. We will see in couple of minutes the full form and other thing in a typical slide model. So, this is in inspiratory reserve volume, which is on and above the tidal volume. Now, similar is true when we are doing inspiration, we also do forceful expiration also. So, we can breathe some extra volume of in. So, after forceful inspiration, we can do normal breathing, and then suddenly we will do a forceful expiration. So, we will forcefully pull it out certain volume of air with the help of same abdominal muscle and intercostal and diaphragmatic muscle, but there is an involvement of abdominal muscle. So, this extra forceful expiration is called same, like this is inspiratory reserve volume, this is expiratory reserve volume. So, these are all volumes, tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume and expiratory reserve volume. So, inspiratory reserve volume is on an average approximately 3000 ml, while expiratory reserve volume is approximately 1100 ml. Now, if we start looking into the total aspect here, so we have normal breathing, forceful inspiration, normal breathing, forceful expiration. There is a constant kind of volume always available in lung. So, there will be a constant volume in spite of this forceful activities, there will be a constant volume of air available in this lung cavity. Now, this area, this volume which is constantly present is called residual volume. So, this residual volume will always be there inside lung, and this is approximately 1200 ml. Now, these all values depend upon a healthy person. So, a healthy person can do this much volume of air inspired and expired in normal physiological condition, and these can vary in certain disease conditions. These are certain parameters that indicates that how flexible your lung is. Now, there is an instrument that does all this calculation, and we call that instrument as spirometer. Spirometer. So, spirometer is an instrument. We are not going to discuss this spirometer in detail, but this is just an instrument having a mouthpiece, so a person can blow the air, and there will be a cylinder where you have an oxygen tank and all, and once you blow the air, the oxygen tank will float in the based on the volume which you are blowing inside, and then there will be a graphical representation in the seat which will give you a complete volume picture. So, this is an instrument called a spirometer, and the technique is called spirometry. Spirometry. So, the spirometry is a technique, and the instrument is called spirometer, which generally used to do this volume calculation. Now, science is very fascinating, and biology is always very fascinating in terms of nomenclature, numbering, name and all. So, somebody came up with an idea, look, we are always talking about this volume. Can we start a terminology called capacity? So, there is a term we need to understand called capacity. Now, capacity is nothing but a group of volume. When you combine volume, there is some capacity. Now, if we see that we can combine this tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume, we can call it inspiratory capacity. So, if we add these two, so these two, so we will just have this tidal volume and this inspiratory reserve volume. If we combine this, we can call it inspiratory capacity. So, capacity is nothing but addition of two volumes. So, just to give a fancy name to this picture, we are just calling it capacity, inspiratory capacity. Similarly, when we combine this tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume, we can call this one as expiratory capacity. So, inspiratory capacity and expiratory capacity. When we combine this all three, we can call it vital capacity. So, this is vital capacity that will have inspiratory reserve volume, tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume. If we combine all these four, like tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume and residual volume, we can call this one as total lung capacity, TLC. So, the total lung capacity, so these are all capacity. Right? So, total lung capacity is the capacity of the total lung area. the total lung volume is approximately, we'll just calculate now. So somebody came up with an idea that, look, everything is there. Can we combine this expiratory reserve volume and residual volume? So if we combine expiratory reserve volume and residual volume, we call it functional residual capacity. So everything is capacity here. So we have inspiratory capacity, expiratory capacity, vital capacity, total lung capacity, and the functional residual capacity, which is nothing but addition of volumes. Now, this all volumes are having some significance when we are talking this one in terms of physiology, because when we see this one in depth, that why this is tidal volume, why this is inspiratory reserve volume, and why it is expiratory reserve volume, one can nicely depict the functionality of the lung. Any deviation, anything which is mismatching in this can lead to functional abnormality in the lung cavity, and that can be diagnosed and treated accordingly, because these are all related to lung function. Now, we will just do some calculation here. So, since we are calling this one as, so if we see this total lung capacity, which is the mixture of all, so if we add tidal volume 500 plus inspiratory reserve volume 3000 plus we have expiratory reserve volume 1100, and then we have residual volume as 1200. So if you combine, we will get 3000, 4000, 5800. So 5800 ml is approximately the total lung capacity of a human being. So total lung capacity is this much, and accordingly one can nicely see that what is inspiratory capacity is simply 3000 plus 500, which is 3500. So inspiratory capacity is 3000 plus 500, which will give 3500 ml, and similarly for other one. So now we will go back and see in the slide that we have total volume here, and in total volume we are having tidal volume. So what we are doing here is we are just summarizing the whole phenomena which we have discussed till now into form of slides. So we have lung volumes such as tidal volume, we have just given a short form as TV. Next is inspiratory reserve volume, which we have given a form IRV, expiratory reserve volume, which we have given a form ERV, and then we have residual volume as RV. So these are lung volume. In the next slide, we have lung capacity, and in lung capacity, we have inspiratory capacity, we can just call it IC, expiratory capacity EC, functional residual capacity FRC, vital capacity VC, and total lung capacity as TLC. Now, we can always give capacity into form of some mathematical model, and what we discuss is capacity is nothing but two or more volumes. So if we add inspiratory capacity, it will give tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume. If we see expiratory capacity, it is nothing but tidal volume plus expiratory reserve volume. Next one is functional residual capacity, is just addition of expiratory reserve volume and residual volume. Then we have vital capacity, which is tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume plus expiratory reserve volume, and we will not just simplify it saying that we can always see that inspiratory capacity is TV plus IRV. So can we change this formula into IC plus ERV? And then we have total lung capacity, which is nothing but the summarization of all four volumes: tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume, and residual volume. So now this is what we have discussed in this mechanism of breathing, and one should understand that these volumes are very critical, and one has to understand the whole mechanism of breathing with lung and this capacity individually. Next, we will see the exchange of gases, how this exchange of gases takes place in the lung cavity. So, now we will discuss about the exchange of gases. So, we will discuss now this total lung in terms of exchange aspect, how the carbon dioxide and oxygen is getting exchanged in alveoli as well as tissue level. So, we need to understand some basic aspect of our lung physiology. Now, so what we are going to discuss is exchange of gases. So, exchange of gases. To understand this exchange of gases, we need to understand the two important area. One is lung and the other one is tissue. Now, lung and tissue are the two entirely different area which we need to understand in order to see the exchange of gases. In lung, we have discussed in the basic structure of lung, which is alveoli. So, if we start looking into the alveoli, so this is alveoli. This alveoli are made up of very thin membrane. We call it squamous epithelium, and this epithelium are very thin in order to give exchange of gases. Now, these are nicely connected with a very thin layer of blood vessels, which we call capillary. Now, this capillary is nothing but very thin blood vessels. If we see the normal blood vessel is having a middle lumen, we call it lumen, and this outside area is a smooth muscle. So, we will discuss this in our locomotion and movement chapter, that this smooth muscle are involuntary in nature. So, they are not in our control. So, they can behave differently based on the pressure of the, or actually rather we can call it in a different way, this flexibility will decide the pressure of this lumen, the diameter of this lumen, and if there will be a change in this diameter can define the blood pressure, because blood is coming from this direction. So if the whole lumen is getting narrowed, the blood pressure will increase. If this whole lumen become enlarged, the blood pressure will decrease. So, this is very important in order to understand this lumen aspect of this blood vessel. Now, in case of this capillary, this smooth muscle area is very thin. So, what is happening, this area is simply like this. So, these are all lining of the blood vessel. The lining of blood vessel is called endothelium. Endothelium. So, this is nothing but the lining of this capillary. Now, this thinness is very important in order to exchange the gaseous element or gaseous oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, this whole blood vessel and capillary in terms of anatomy is quite different in their lumen diameter. Now, this is about lung and the structure associated with this alveoli, which we call capillary. Now, similarly, we have tissue. Now, in tissue level, we have, suppose this is the tissue, these are nucleus of the cell, and we can combine a cell and call it tissue. So, tissue is nothing but the collection of cell. One can define the blood. So, blood is nothing but fluid connective tissue, which we will discuss later on. So, these individual cells are combining to form tissue. Now, this tissue also is having this thin capillary in the tissue level, like one we have in the alveoli level, we have similar kind of capillary in the tissue level that can exchange the gaseous element. So, these are the two distinct areas which we need to understand. Now, we will now see that what is happening in this area. So, this is alveoli, and so I just deleted it in order to give some space to the board and just to understand what is happening. Now, there is an additional organ which we need to understand here is what we call heart. Now, heart is an organ of human circulatory system. So, heart is the pumping organ that can pump the blood to different organ and also to lung. Now, all the deoxygenated blood. So, what we will do here, we will try to understand the circulation and then we will see the whole circulation in terms of mm of Hg, and I will show you the whole thing in the slide also. So, what is happening here, that this whole tissue, the blood coming from the tissue area is full of carbon dioxide, or we can simply say that carbon dioxide percentage is very high in that blood. So, this blood is coming from tissue level. Now, this is very high in carbon dioxide concentration. We can say this is deoxygenated blood. So, deoxygenated blood is having less oxygen and more carbon dioxide, and the vein which carried this deoxygenated blood is called vena cava. Vena cava is the vein which is carrying the deoxygenated blood towards heart. So, the heart, we will just see, this is right atrium, this is left atrium. So, this is right atrium, this is right ventricle, this is left atrium, left ventricle. So, these are 4 chambers of the human heart. So, we have upper chamber called atrium and the lower chamber is called ventricle. So, this is divided into right and left. So, this whole deoxygenated blood is coming to the right atrium. So, this vena cava is carrying all the blood to right atrium. This right atrium deoxygenated blood is passing through the ventricle, and from ventricle this pulmonary artery is coming out. So, we can call it pulmonary artery. So, this pulmonary artery is coming out from ventricle and supplying the deoxygenated blood to lung. So, we are not summarizing here as an alveoli, we will just call it lungs. So, now this is pulmonary artery, and I am just emphasizing again the point that all arteries carry oxygenated blood except this pulmonary artery which carry deoxygenated blood, and similarly is true when we will discuss about pulmonary vein. All veins carry deoxygenated blood except pulmonary vein which carry oxygenated blood. So, what is happening here, the whole deoxygenated blood is coming into lung, and from lung there is an exchange of gases. So, because the concentration of oxygen is quite high in the atmosphere, so it is getting transferred into blood, and the carbon dioxide concentration is in deoxygenated blood is high. So, it is getting exchanged out into the atmospheric content, and then we are getting oxygenated blood from the lung. So, the oxygenated blood is coming to the left atrium. So, oxygenated blood, this is having high in oxygen concentration is very high, and CO2 is very low, CO2 is low. So, this is pulmonary, that was pulmonary artery, and this is called pulmonary vein. So, this pulmonary vein is basically carrying oxygenated blood, the pure form of the blood. Now, this pulmonary vein which carrying the oxygenated blood is getting transferred to the ventricle, left ventricle, and from left ventricle the another artery is coming out, and this is called systemic artery, systemic artery. Systemic artery is basically supplying this oxygenated form of our blood to tissue level. So, these are rich in oxygen and less rich in carbon dioxide, and then there will be an exchange of gases in this level. So, because oxygen is oxygen is required in tissue level. So, oxygen from higher concentration to lower concentration is getting in, and carbon dioxide which is coming out from the from the tissue is because of the higher concentration is coming from tissue to the blood vessel. And then from this capillary, which is the thin form of blood vessel at the tissue level, is carrying through this vena cava and going to the right atrium. So this is in nutshell about the circulation of complete heart, lung and the tissue level. Now this is important in order to understand the volume aspect. Now we will go in the volume. So what is happening? The lung volume is very high in oxygen and carbon dioxide content. So the oxygen pressure is approximately 95 mm of mercury, while carbon dioxide concentration is approximately 40 mm of Hg. Now these are coming in the level of it is coming in the level of tissue, and in tissue, because of the higher concentration of oxygen, oxygen is getting inside tissue and then carbon dioxide is coming into the blood vessel. So the carbon dioxide concentration is getting high, so the CO2 is getting high, the 45 mm of Hg, and oxygen content is getting down with 40 mm of Hg. So this is happening. So this whole slide gets cluttered a little bit, but I will just try to summarize the whole thing in the form of a slide. Now the whole idea here, the whole thing which we need to understand here is the circulation of oxygen and carbon dioxide against the concentration gradient. So we will try to go back a little bit and try to dig out the what is happening in the tissue level. So after the food processing and all, we are getting out carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is coming from the basic catabolism happening inside the tissue level. So this carbon dioxide is toxic to the cell, so they need to come out, and this higher concentration of oxygen is getting exchanged from the blood, which is carrying out all the nutrient, all the oxygen, carbon dioxide content from lung, which is quite high in oxygen concentration, getting exchanged here. So oxygen is going inside the tissue and carbon dioxide is coming out. And then similarly is happening here when we have this oxygen concentration is very less in this deoxygenated content, and from lung, because of the higher concentration of this lung, we will see what is happening in the tissue level. So this is what is complete picture of the exchange of gases in the tissue level as well as in the lung level. Now we will see what is happening inside. Of course, we will not go in detail, but we need to understand that what is happening in the alveoli and all. So just try to focus here. So this we have the alveoli. So suppose this is alveoli, and the lining of alveoli is very thin, what we discussed earlier as squamous epithelium. Squamous epithelium. Epithelium is any outer covering. So epithelium is any outer covering of any tissue or any cell. Now this epithelium is very thin, and what we discussed that we have this blood is coming either from the tissue side or going towards the tissue side. Anyway, we will just try to understand here. So we have very thin lining here. We called it endothelium, as I discussed earlier also. The lining is called endothelium of the blood vessel. Now blood is flowing this direction. Now if we try to see the blood picture, how the blood is flowing. So suppose this is a capillary. If the blood is flowing in any direction, what is happening? So this is blood cell. So we have RBC and WBC flowing in the center. We called it axial zone or axial zone. And then we have this area which is not having any cell. So this is called plasmatic zone. Plasmatic zone. So axial and plasmatic zone are the synchronized structure in the blood vessel. Of course, there will be a streamline flow, so the Reynolds number is quite constant, and if we have any disturbance, any kind of rupture or any kind of protrusion or kind of inflammation in the blood vessel, the flow the air, the blood flow is getting disturbed. That means the Reynolds number is not getting constant, and because of this region, the blood is not streamlined but turbulent. So this will go in detail in circulatory system. Of course, we have to understand here in context of what we are discussing here in exchange. So the blood is coming in this direction. Of course, this is exile zone, and then we have a plasmatic zone outside. So because of this concentration, these are very thin. So getting exchange of this is quite common. So oxygen from higher concentration to lower concentration, and from carbon dioxide from higher concentration to lower concentration is exchanged in this area. So this is in nutshell about the whole picture. Now we will discuss it in the form of a slide here. So if you see that the partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide in respiratory gases, one can nicely see that atmospheric air is having very high percentage of oxygen and very low percentage of CO2. So in terms of mm of Hg, atmospheric air is 159 mm of Hg, while CO2 is 0.3 mm of Hg. While in alveoli, the concentration is a little bit decreased from the atmospheric side in terms of O2. So it is giving 104 mm of Hg, and CO2 is 40 mm of Hg. While in case of oxygenated blood, the oxygen is getting exchanged and coming into the blood circulation. It is giving 95 mm of Hg, while CO2 concentration is 40 mm of Hg. And in tissue level, where there is a deoxygenation of the blood, when the CO2 concentration is getting exchanged and increased from 40 to 45, and oxygen is become 40. And in tissue level, again the same thing, where we have a deoxygenated blood, the mm of Hg of O2 is 40 and CO2 is 45. So now, having said that, these are the volumetric picture. We don't need to understand or need to go and dig the individual aspect, but we need to understand the basic structure, how these volumes are getting fluctuated, how these volumes are getting maintained in the lung cavity. And once we will understand the volume aspect, like what we have discussed in the tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume and the capacity, these are all volume, and these are getting exchanged from the atmosphere. Now, there is always a question that when we go in the higher altitude, we are always feeling that oxygen concentration is very less, and because of the oxygen concentration is very less, we are feeling little bit shortness in the breathing. Because of this shortness in breathing, why we are calling this shortness in the breathing? Because of this decline in or decrease in the pressure of oxygen. So when we go in higher altitude, that means this pressure is very important in order to understand the whole mechanistic aspect of this lung. Because once we'll go in very high concentration of oxygen and very low concentration of oxygen, one can nicely appreciate that there is a disturbance in breathing the air in and out. So there will be always shortness of breathing when we go in the higher altitude, in the mountains and all. Once we'll go in very high, that concentration of oxygen is down, and then we'll start behaving this one. So this is in a nutshell. We will discuss about the mechanism of breathing, the volume of the air, and also the exchange of gases in the tissue level as well as in the alveoli level. In the next class, we will try to discuss the transport of gases. So in the transport of gases, what we will understand is how these gases which are coming into the blood circulation after diffusion from the alveoli higher concentration to lower concentration, how these are getting transported, what form of the oxygen these are transported. These are just exchange in the level of alveoli and tissue with the phenomena of diffusion because of the higher and lower gradient. But we will try to understand what is happening, how these are transported in the form of some other component which we will discuss in the next class.